This project is about the Fabian Society, and it covers its history from 1883 to 1915. The focus of this project was on the formation of the society, the people it drew, the work in society, and the development of their ideas in the early days. It begins with where society was at that time in 1883 and points to a notable piece of literature that had been written by a member of Parliament right there at the beginning. This article really defines in many ways the beginning of the reasons for the society, and social reform was that way of creating a more equitable society for all. And that's really what this society was all about, was creating an equitable society. So this society drew men and women who had somewhat radical ideas of social reform. Some of the most famous members would be H.G. Wells, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, George Bernard Shaw, that famous playwright, you may know that name, and even Hubert Bland. These were all men and women from the London area, and the society remained as an instigator of reform in London, and they did not really branch out too much into other cities or countries with their ideas of reform. A lot of it stayed very local. So if you see the map, you will note that the mapped points specifically for the society's movements and where they had events and things like that, they were all located in London in close proximity to the other locations, very much right there in central to all the other points. So the Fabian Society was predicated on the idea that reform should be slow and steady with changes at the root rather than a more popular way of going about change in the form of writing, public demonstrations. Anything that was violent or could lead to violence was not the nature of the Fabian Society. The goal or purpose of the project was to outline the beginning of the Fabian Society, and it's still going strong today. And so that has had an influence in politics and in many of today's governments, societies, local politics, things like that. So when a group or idea is influential, it is important to know the background and what started that because it brings clarity and understanding the present. So you may find many of their ideas for reform relevant in places today. You may have seen it acted out in places today. And so it's good to know the background, kind of where those ideas got started. Much like the purpose of the goal of the goal of the project, it matters because it gives a brief description of an influential society and that provides the timeline. So the years the project spans, which is that 1883 to 1915, it's somewhat of a long time, however, in the grand scheme is really not that long of a time. The Fabian Society spent much of their time in the later years, especially where the project covers it talks about their lecturing, a lot of the lectures that they did, the learning that they did for years to be able to present lectures, and many of the writings, they were known for their tracts and just kind of influencing people through writings that made sense for them. And also, they ended up working in efforts through the government. So they did write some bills, and even some of the members were elected to the school board to begin implementing the ideas that this society favored. So they were able to do that by actually being influential in government places like that. I want to leave you with a couple of takeaways after you learn more from the project. I hope you do take away a couple of things here. And that's one, to know more about the Fabian Society. If you've never heard of it, you have now. And it tends to come up in historical research from this time period. And now you'll know a little bit about its start. I think it's because it is so influential, or it has been so influential. It's really important to kind of know how it got started, who was involved, and really what their focus was on. And then secondly, to understand the basic idea of the society, which was that it was a society for peaceful social reform. Said that a couple different times. That's really what they were about, and being founded on the heels of of a newfound Marxist ideology, and So it really takes many of Marx's beliefs and I would say sanitizes them, so to speak, to make them more well received by the community through education and law reform. And you will see that towards the end of the project where it does kind of compare Marxism with the Fabian Society's ideas of how you get there. Those two, the way to get to the reform looks different, but many of the same ideas and elevating the working class and creating that equitable society. So I hope you take those two things from the project. I hope you enjoy reading more about the Fabian Society.